they heard about a country halfway around the world with very few Christians in it. As a matter of fact, they heard that this country only had a handful of Christians in the entire country, and it was a big area. And so they read their Bible, and they read Matthew 28, where Jesus told them to take the gospel into the whole world, and they felt convicted about that. And so they were young, but they prayed about it, and they studied, and they talked to the elders, and they got excited, and they planned a mission trip. Now, they didn't speak the same language as the people in this country, but they worked on it, and they studied, and they planned, and they indeed formed a mission trip. And they flew halfway across the world, and they flew into one of the busiest airports in that country. And again, they hadn't learned the language completely. They weren't fluent, but they had learned enough of the language that as they passed the sign welcoming them to the city, they were able to make out a sign that said, "Welcome to Bowling Green, Kentucky." Now, this is a fictional story for now. The church will always exist. The Bible promises us that. There will always be a righteous remnant. But just because there will always be a church does not mean that there will always be a church in the city that you live in, or the county that you live in, or maybe even the state that you live in. See, God has promised the church will always exist, but where it will exist is, well, that's in large part up to us. God has done the heavy lifting in establishing the church, and then He has commissioned people like you and I to make sure that that happens and that it grows. And that's a little bit scary, but it should be comforting. God has factored in all our abilities and our disabilities into the commission that He has given us. So will there be a strong church where you are in the future? Well, in large part, congratulations. Guess what? That depends on you. Now, God has tasked us with this. We're looking at the idea of Isaiah and beholding the glory of God in order to make us evangelistic. And turn to Isaiah chapter 6, and we'll look at verses 1 through 8. Now, Melvin went into detail on this last night in his lesson, and so we won't go into that same detail, and I appreciate that. He saved us a lot of time. And we'll just summarize it, but in case you weren't there, we'll go into a little bit of the detail. But look with me at Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of His robe filled the temple. If we were in the presence of God, His glory would astonish us. It would stun us, and even His glory would spread out, as it were, around the temple. And above Him stood the seraphim, and each had 6 wings. And with 2 He covered His face, and with 2 He covered His feet, and with 2 He flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of Him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And then look, 2 things happened to Isaiah when he sees the glory of God. The first one is this. And he said, Woe is me, for I am lost. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. First, when Isaiah sees the glory of God, he sees himself for who he is, a man of unclean lips. You know, sometimes we think we're pretty good. And in some ways, we probably are pretty good. But when we understand who God is, that really humbles us and it puts things in perspective. But the second thing that Isaiah does is this. Look at verse 6. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. The first thing that we do when we see the presence of God is we understand who we really are. It puts us into perspective, and it humbles us. But the second thing that it can do in us is what it does in Isaiah. And Isaiah says, Here I am, send me. Let me help. Let me be part of the solution. Now, not everybody says that when they see the glory of God. In the wilderness, as they wandered around, some of the Israelites saw the glory of God. They saw the mountain shake. They were too scared to go to it. And you know what they did? They whined and they murmured and they complained and they didn't trust God and they didn't believe God over and over and over. And that generation died in the wilderness. And when Jesus put on flesh and came to this earth and people saw the glory of God, some people got mad at Him, and instead of seeing the man He had just cured, got upset about the man-made laws that God had broken. See, they saw the glory of God and they did absolutely nothing to it. What kind of person will you be when you see the glory of God? Will you respond and say, Here I am, send me, or will you be indifferent to that? And so Isaiah says, Here I am, send me. Now, what has the glory of God done for you? God created the universe. Everything. You think about the prettiest place that you've ever been. Do you know who created that? God. He created the entire universe, and then when we created a problem, He put on flesh and stepped down into the earth. And then when He got here, He was born to poor parents, He was born into some rough conditions, and He lived a hard life. As a matter of fact, He sacrificed every single day. He stepped out of heaven, the place that you and I are working to get to. He left that and came here. And when He got here, well, at least He was treated well. He was treated terrible. He was exhausted. He sacrificed. He gave Himself all the time. And His reward was to be mocked, to be spat upon, to be beaten, and to be murdered. And even if we don't let God work in us, He still sends people and His word to reach us anyway, just so that we might have the chance. That's the kind of God that there is. You think about in the days of Noah, when the earth was destroyed, how many people were saved? 8. Did God know that before Noah started building the ark? Yes, He did. But He still had him build the ark, and He had him spend around 100 years doing that. God, why waste 100 years building an ark when people aren't going to respond? Because that's the kind of God that we serve. He gives people a chance. You remember when Abraham's going to go into the promised land, and God says, you can't have it yet. You're actually going to be dead before your descendants get it. Why would you make your friend wait past his death to get the promised land? Somebody else is already living there. God doesn't just go in and kick people out. He loves those people too. But He tells Abraham, their iniquity is not yet full, and He gives them generation after generation after generation to change their ways. And do they? No. But why does God do it? Because God wants them to have a chance. Some of the prophets had a hard job. Preaching, nobody's going to listen. But preach anyway, because that's the kind of God that I am. I want people to have the chance. And so God, His glory, should create a response in us that is more than just being baptized and attending. But when we see the glory of God, we should be moved like Isaiah to say, God, what do you want me to do? You know the sermon in Acts 2 on the day of Pentecost, the birth of the church. Peter walks them through the Old Testament, and then he points to Jesus. And he said, when He got here, you killed Him. And their response to that is, what should we do? That should be our response. God, what would you have me to do? 2 things happened to Isaiah when he saw the glory of the Lord. It humbled him, and it made him want to tell others. Well, what about us? Now, you have a choice in this, if you want to tell people or not. You have a choice if you want to do that. But if you want to be a Christian, like for real, a real one, not someone that just wears the name, but if you actually want to be a Christian, then this is a truth for you right here. You are a missionary. Now, we send missionaries into India, and we send missionaries into China, and we send missionaries into Mexico. And I tell you what, it's a lot easier to do that than to send a missionary into your life. But we don't have to send a missionary into your life if you choose to be a real Christian, because we have one, and that's you. This is so interesting. In Luke 3:23, it says, now Jesus Himself was about 30 years old when He began His ministry. That is His public ministry. But my question for you is this: how old were you when you began your ministry? And if you haven't yet, when are you going to? Jesus was about 30. When are you going to start? You know, see, the problem is some people, yeah, they're baptized and they attend, but they never actually start their ministry. But if you're going to do this for real, you've got to start yours. Jesus knew what His was. Yours will be different, but it should mirror His. It should be similar, at least in our efforts. What will your ministry be? You know, I don't know what the standard is in your house. I don't know most of you. I only know a few of you, and I don't know most of your parents. I may only know a couple of your parents. So I don't know what normal is at home. I don't know what church you're from. I don't know what normal is at your congregation, but I do know what normal is in the Bible. And this is normal in the Bible, that each of us take this mission seriously. Flip over to Ephesians chapter 4 with me. I want to look at verses 11 and 12. And I think this should be one of those passages that you know where to turn to when someone starts to read it, because I think it's that important. Really the whole chapter, but I want you to underline some of these things if you feel compelled to do that after we read this. But look at verse 11. So God is talking about why He gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers. You know, in some places we would finish that sentence this way. Here's why we have preachers, teachers, elders, missionaries: to do everything for us. But let's see what the verse says. Here's the reason that we were given these roles. Verse 12, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Neil, what is a saint? All right. Someone who is set apart for a particular purpose. You could say Christian and not really do any disservice to it. So these offices that we have are to equip the saints or to equip the Christians for the work of ministry. Did that say somebody that went to preaching school? Did that say somebody that's on a payroll somewhere? I said what? Christian. Saint. You don't have to be a Christian. But if you choose to, part of what you'll need to do is to get ready for the work of ministry. Someone may say in the future, are you a minister? And we're quick to say no, because what they mean is, do you get paid to preach? And not to be smart aleck, but as a Christian, our answer to that should actually be what? Yes. Now, we don't have any, are you an elder? Past tense. Okay, you're safe then. I catch a stray, I can't guarantee that. But if I had elders in here, what I would want to say to them is this: when you hear this read, that one of your roles is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, do you say, that's right, amen? Or does that make you shrink back a little bit? And if that makes you shrink back, I hope a response would be to be heartbroken over that. Because our work as leadership is not to do everything for everybody. It's to train them to do the thing themselves and then get out of their way and let them do that. And be there and guide them when we can. Now imagine reporting to a practice for the first time. Any of you guys play sports? Okay, we have a few. All right. Love sports. Imagine you report to practice for the first time, and you get there and you're excited. You don't know what to do. This is your first time. And you get there, and there's a coach over there, and he's talking to another adult, and they're just chewing the fat, and they're talking, and they keep talking. And then you see the senior players, and they're just kind of shooting around or practicing. And you stand there, and it's been 10 minutes, and you think, okay, we're running behind. It's been 15 minutes. It's been 30. It's been an hour. And the whistle blows, and your mom comes to pick you up. What a practice. Boy, that really got me equipped. None of the leaders acted like leaders. We just showed up and stood around. What kind of a practice would that be? What kind of team do you think we have? Well, the role of leaders is to get us a plan, get us together, and to equip us for the work of ministry. Now, this is going to be a lot easier if you're at a congregation where that's already happening, and you can just say, where can I plug in? But if your leaders aren't doing that, and maybe they are here, but when you go to college, you're going to find yourself at a place that's kind of depressing, and nobody is really showing you what to do. That does not absolve you of your responsibility to figure out how to start your ministry and how to be active as a missionary. It's going to be harder, but it can be done. And the good news is this: you can do it. God will equip you with what you need. And if you will, if you'll take Christianity seriously, and if you'll actually get busy about the work of ministry, do you know what you'll find? That church in Christianity is the most complete that it ever has been in your life. If you get to work instead of showing up and consuming, Christianity will actually mean a lot more to you. So what I want to do with the rest of our time today, if you're willing to get a plan together, I want to give you 5 things that you need to do. So I'm not just talking about 5 things that you need to do to be on a membership roll somewhere. I'm not even talking about 5 things you need to do so that the rest of the church will think you're a pretty good person. But I'm talking about 5 things you need to do if you're going to take this serious and be a missionary in your life. These are 5 things that you're going to have to do, I think. The first thing is this. It seems so simple, but just obey what you read. You know, I've spent a large portion of my life learning different things, and the Bible is one of those. And I love to sit at the feet of people that are smarter than me. It's not that hard. But I love to sit at their feet, and I love to learn from them. But if we're not careful, learning can become a bad thing. Because we may learn more than we ever do. We all know people. They know the answer to everything. They have a plan. They know everything about. The problem is they've never actually done it. I think it was Mike Tyson that said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. There is a difference between sitting in here and talking about evangelism and going to do it. But we need to learn and we need to study. We don't have anything to share if we don't study, and we'll get to that. But we need to actually just obey what it is that we read. In Revelation chapter 1, 2, and 3, Jesus talks to churches that are drifting. Did you know churches have been drifting from the truth ever since there were churches? You know the song, Get Right Church and Let's Go Home? Revelation 1 through 3, Get Right Church. We love the idea of restoration. You know, I have a 1968 Volkswagen bus. And I don't know why, but I've always thought those things were so cool. And one of the things that I want to do with that is I want to restore it and get it as close to the original as I possibly can. And so we love the idea of the restoration in churches of Christ because the goal is great. We want to restore the churches where we are as close to the original as possible. Now turn to Acts chapter 2. And we're going to spend quite a few minutes here. This idea of restoration just asks us to go just back to the Bible. And normally when we go to Acts chapter 2 with this idea of restoring things, that is, let's not be a denomination. Let's be pre-denominational. Let's be anti-denominational. Let's be different. And we want to be just this church. And we look at these verses and say, let's just worship like they did. And is that important? Yeah, absolutely. Let's just become Christians like they did. Is that important? Absolutely. There's no substitute for it. But for a church that's already doing those things, is there anything else that we can learn from Acts 2? What should we do? Well, we should focus on the things that may not have been fully restored. And we should just obey what we read. Look at verse 37. Somebody read that. Get a little participation. So Acts 2, somebody read verse 37.
Now when they heard this, they were cut to the heart and said to Peter and the rest of the apostles, Men and brethren, what shall we do?
They heard a teaching and they were pricked in their heart. It bothered them. They gripped the back of the pew if they had been sitting in pews. They weren't listening anymore. A tear was rolling down their cheek. They weren't content to say, where are we going to eat? Let's go somewhere else. Let's go home. I can't wait to play outside when this is over. It bothered them, and they could not go home until they did something about it. The people that they rode to Jerusalem with, a couple of them, were pulling their shoulders saying, this is stupid. Let's get out of here. And they're fighting against it as tears roll down their face. And they say, I've got a problem. I've got to figure out what to do. It actually bothered them. You know, one of the things, I don't know your elders well, but one of the things I love about Russell Simpson is sometimes it's hard for him to make announcements because he's busy crying. Great, and praise God for it. If we ever get to a spot where we can't be touched by the truth and by growth and by sin and by forgiveness, then shame on us, and we'll be part of the problem. But the early church was very tender-hearted. You know, some people are so hard-hearted, there's no point in having a Bible study anymore because there's not one more verse you can show them. There's not one more verse of an invitation song that you can lead that they'll come forward and do something. They're not doing anything. They're hard-hearted. Far be it from us. Just obey what you read. Verse 37, they were pricked in their heart. You be tender-hearted too. That's a good thing. Next, look at verses 42 through 47. And I'm just going to skim this. But this is talking about after the birth of the church and that first day, as they're becoming Christians, it says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship. Then you go down to verse 44, all who believed were together. You go down to verse 46, and day by day. You go down to verse 47, and the Lord added to their number day by day. The second thing I want you to see from this, just obey what you read, be tender-hearted. But number two is that they were together. Now, it might mess up your schedule if you get together with Christians every day or as close to it as you possibly can. I'll admit that. It may mess up your schedule. But if you do it, it may save your soul. If we're going to just obey what we read, it's great to talk about church growth and to have an evangelism seminar. But what if, this is crazy, hear me out, we just did what it is that we read? You spend time with other Christians and you see what happens. The church will grow. Look at verse 44. The next thing I want you to see, so they were tender-hearted, they spent time together, but they also shared. Acts 2:44, all who believed were together and had all things in common. Verse 46 says they had singleness of heart. Now, I remember being a kid, and I had a very fine print Bible. Whoever gave it to me, I don't think really wanted me to read that much. But I was reading, nevertheless. And I read Acts 2:44, and it said they had all things in common. And I remember thinking they all agreed on everything. Well, that's not what it means. What it means is that they shared things. Now, this is different than communism, because communism is someone takes it without your choice, and they give it out as they see fit. But this is different because it is a volunteer thing. They shared the things that they had. You flip over, if you were to do that, in Acts 4:32, it describes it this way. Now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. You know this is true, I think. Most people at some point in their life have a time where they need a hand up. Not a hand out, but a hand up. The scripture says if a man won't work, he also shouldn't eat. And the scriptures also say that if a man does not provide for those of his own household, he's worse than an infidel, than an unbeliever. That's not what we're talking about, someone who won't work. We're talking about those times in life when we get to a situation where it says we are here and we need to get here, but there is a gap and we cannot get there on our own. All of us, your parents, you ask them, have had a time where they did not think they were going to make ends meet. And what do we need in those moments? Sometimes we need a hand up. We need somebody to bend down and to help us up. Not because we won't work, but because we just need a little bit of help. And do you know what God's answer to those times that we go through where we need a little bit of help is? Each other. One of my favorite verses, 2 Corinthians 7:6, says, God who comforts the downcast comforted me by the coming of Titus. You know, sometimes when you're praying, dear God, please help me, his answer to that is another Christian. Isn't that amazing? And so with the early church, if we'll just obey what we read, we're going to value people over the possessions that we have. Now, that might mean that we get taken advantage of from time to time. But God owns me, and he owns all of my possessions. And so I mentioned already I have a Volkswagen bus. I also have a Jeep Compass, and we have a Nissan Armada. That means me and my wife, the only two adults in our home, have 3 cars. If you ever need to borrow one, I promise you that you can. Now, you probably have to come to Rome, Georgia, or I might meet you halfway. But if I have a home, that means other Christians have a home. If I have a table that's going to have food on it, that means other Christians have a table that's going to have food on it. If I have a car and somebody needs a car, that means that they can have it. This can't be done in theory, but has to be practiced and lived out. We cannot tell our children, love your neighbor as yourself, while we keep everything that we have for ourselves. We get our home so nice, HGTV could do a profile on us, and then we shut the door and we don't want people to come in. And then we tell our kids, well, we love everybody. We're not acting like that. But if we would just obey what we read, all that believe were together and had all things in common. I bet if you ever have a need, the church will step up. And I bet they better if that's the case. One of the reasons that my hand is stretched out to give help when needed is because God's is. Now, I can't reach as far as God, but I can reach this far. And if it's enough to get to you, then I'll do it. Another thing that they did is they went from house to house. Now turn over to, for this point, Acts chapter 5 and look at verse 42. Again, you're going to see this idea of every day. Some people will look at Acts 2 and it'll say, well, sure, they were together every day. The church had just been born. People's rods left them in Jerusalem. They ran out of money, so they just stayed there learning and they shared. But you go several years later and you get to Acts chapter 5 and verse 42, and it still says, and every day in the temple and from house to house. They did not cease teaching and preaching that the Christ is Jesus. Now, you've got a chapter break right there, and you go into chapter 6 and verse 1, but there's not an original chapter break in it. It's all one flow of thought. Look at verse 1 in the next chapter. Now, in these days when the disciples were increasing in number, well, I wonder why they were increasing in number. Because they went from day to day to day to day into people's homes. Do you believe in restoration or not? You know, I'm afraid if we're not careful, we love the restoration that somebody else did 100 years ago. And we completely neglect the restoration that needs to be done in our generation by us. You want to be radical? Just do what you read in the first few chapters of Acts. Spend time together talking about spiritual things. I'm in a group on Facebook called Praise Reports Churches of Christ. Are any of you in that group? Anybody? All right, so the whole goal of that group is, the guy that runs it, posts baptisms from Churches of Christ every day. Okay, so you may think nobody wants the truth. Join that group, and you'll change your mind. All right, but do you know what day by far has the most baptisms reported? Would anyone like to guess? Anybody? Nope, not Monday. Close, though. Sunday. They're probably reported on Monday, but they happened on Sunday. And do you know why that is? That's when we're together talking about spiritual things. If we rewrote Acts 2:47, I'm afraid it would say, and the Lord added to the church on Sundays those that were being saved, because that's the only time we get together. You want to be radical? Do this. The church cannot grow from Sunday to Sunday. See you next Sunday is the death rattle of a dying congregation. You want to be radical? and a missionary in your own life. Just obey what you read. Number 2 is this. We just got to change our mindset. What would you do if you were the only Christian in the city that you live in? Well, you may give up. A lot of people have done that. They have found themselves as the only Christian. They have given up, and that would be an option. That is a losing option, because any life without God is not a life worth living, but you could do that. The other thing you could do is this, though, is you could say, I'm going to have to do some things around here. I'm going to have to live like someone who's trying to plant a church or like a missionary. Well, here's a crazy idea. What if you were to go ahead and start doing that right now in the world that you're in, since you've got some help and some resources? There's a guy named Keith Gasarjan. He runs a lot of the Bear Valley schools across the world, and he said this: we've unintentionally done the brotherhood a disservice talking about going on a mission trip, because it implies that it's a destination and also something that only happens every once in a while. Now, you may go on a mission trip with Latin American missions or with this congregation at some point, but it's also true that you're already on a mission trip, and that is the life that you're currently living. What is missing at Cumberland Trace? What's missing in Bowling Green? What's missing at the church where you're at? Well, if you notice it, you might be God's solution to work on that thing. You want more teens here? Do you think it's better going to a congregation where you have a lot of people your age or none? Which of those sounds more fun? The one where you have a lot of people your age. How's your congregation going to get more people your age? What's the plan? Will the plan be that the guy that we hire, we'll hire him and he'll open and close the building? He'll select all the Bible class material. He'll teach it. He'll do all the visits. He'll go do all the Bible studies. And he'll just so happen to convert some people your age. Or his preaching will be so powerful that it will spread through the community and families will just come in droves. Now, you got Neil and Hiram if you're here, so there's a chance that that will happen. But that is a blessing, but not something we should lean on. What's the plan for bringing people in? Your preacher, he's going to go into the schools? No. Who's going to bring them in? You are. Make that your mission. I want to give you some modern examples of this. This is a friend of mine, Taylor Cooper, and he is a first-generation Christian. He moved to town to meet because of a girl, and while he was there, he and that girl went to a trunk or treat at a congregation, and he made a good connection with the preacher, and they ended up studying, and he became a Christian. And so he went to Exposure Youth Camp, and Kirk Brothers got on stage and talked about the mission of Heritage is to train people that can share their faith and to reach the world. And so he marched up to him as Kirk was coming off the stage and said, I'm going to go to Heritage. So he quit his job, and he moved to Heritage and went to school there. And he was working out at the YMCA. And he asked the YMCA, what do you guys do to put the C in this place? What is the C in YMCA? Christian. What do you think the YMCA was doing to put C in it? Absolutely nothing. But when he asked the manager, she said, well, we've actually been talking about that lately. What do you have in mind? And Taylor said, well, I'm a member here. What if I just offer free community Bible studies on Thursday nights? And the YMCA loved that idea. And they said, we're going to make you our inaugural chaplain. And we're going to pay you. And we're going to give you an office, and we're going to give you space in the YMCA, and you can advertise stuff, and you can have these community Bible studies. And so Taylor put up a stand here at the YMCA of the Shoals, and you can see House to House, Heart to Heart here, Authentic Christian Podcast from GDN. All these are Apologetics Press books, and this is a Heritage Christian University tablecloth. And so the YMCA paid Taylor to do this. And so he advertised a Thursday night community Bible study. He was all excited about it. And so the YMCA was so excited about it that they posted about it on social media, Instagram and Facebook and those kinds of things. And his first study, Taylor had a whopping 3 people show up. So Taylor called me the next day to tell me about it, discouraged. Man, I did all this work, put out this table, put out all these flyers, and only 3 people came. And you understand where he's coming from, but 3 people is incredible. That is 3 opportunities. And as a matter of fact, it was only 3. But it went really, really well. And one of the guys that came really loved just opening the Bible and studying it. And he learned a lot, and he learned a lot quickly. And wouldn't you know that, Taylor was able to convert this guy and baptize him. Now, how about that? But I don't know what's normal at your house. And I don't know what's normal at your congregation. But I know what's normal in the Bible. And what's normal in the Bible is when you become a Christian, you're a missionary, and you start spreading the gospel. And so this guy did that and studied with someone, and that same guy that showed up at this study also converted somebody and baptized somebody. Well, wouldn't you know it, he did it again. Now this PowerPoint gets out of date quick because things keep happening. I don't have the next picture up because it's at a pool in somebody's backyard and the guy who baptizes doesn't have a shirt, but just 2 people. Why? Because Taylor said, what do you guys do to put the C in this place? You know who told him to do that? Nobody. You know what the elder said at the place he's on staff? Nothing, because he wasn't on the staff. He was just a Christian who said, YMCC. Huh, who knows? And they paid him to study the Bible with people. Now, that went so well that the local newspaper picked it up and ran an article on it. Talked all about Taylor, all about his conversion story, and here it is going out all throughout Florence and Muscle Shoals, the story of somebody who's doing Bible studies at the local YMCA. His chaplaincy hours mentioned there so that people could show up and could study with him. Weekly Bible studies. I'll tell you about another one. I have a friend of mine about 8 years ago. He's not on staff anywhere. He went to an evangelism seminar and he realized that he had not been evangelistic. And he repented. You know what repentance is? It's you're sorry and then you change. You do something different. And so he said, you know what, I need to be evangelistic. And in those first 2 years of trying to be evangelistic, he baptized 15 people in his swimming pool. Another thing he did is he owns this building. This building is usually full of tractors and cranes and skid steers. And so he had this idea. Nobody is currently coming that much from the community to our gospel meeting. But what if I pull all the stuff out of the equipment in my barn and I invite people to come and we call it a community Bible study? I wonder if people would come. And so he moved all this stuff into the field and he welded this smoker and he made all this barbecue and he fed people and he invited people. And sure enough, people did come. Actually, 150 people came every night to this community Bible study in his barn. Now, some of those were Christians coming to support the meeting from the area, but 50 non-Christians showed up every single night. Do you know which of his bosses told him to do this? Nobody, because he wasn't on staff anywhere. But he was a Christian, and this is part of his Christian responsibility. And from those meetings, some pretty amazing things happened. You can't even see people. There's people on the sides here, people on the sides here. I was in the area and was going to visit, and he called me and said, hey, are you coming to the shop meeting? And I said, I'm thinking about it. We've been at a church camp, and I'm pretty tired. He said, well, will you come and will you speak? Because our speaker just called, and he's in the hospital throwing up blood. And I said, all right, I'll come, and I'll do it. And so I spoke in this meeting. And so one night, somebody had told me as I finished about a couple that had just gotten engaged, and I didn't know them any better than I know you, but I walked up to them and said, can I give you an unsolicited piece of advice? And what are they going to say? I'm the guest speaker there. They're going to say, sure, even if they don't really care. But I said, if you want to have a good marriage, go ahead and find some couples that are happily married. I didn't say married. I said happily married. And go ahead and see if you can start getting dinner with them like once a month. You don't know the answers. You don't even know the questions. Just spend some time with them and see what you can learn. Well, I didn't know that statement had an impact on them. They asked me to do their marriage counseling. So he is a Christian, she is not, which is not a great recipe for success, but they were working on that. And so when I agreed to do their marriage counseling, I said yes, but I told him I'm going to try to walk her to the cross. I'm not going to shove it down her throat, but we're going to steadily get there as much as she'll let me. And so here's the guy that opened up his shop and had the community Bible study, not because somebody told him to, but because he wanted to. And because of that, this guy brought his girlfriend, then fiance, and they studied, and she became a Christian. Now, who made him do this? Nobody, but that's what the Bible calls normal. If you want to be a Christian, that's normal. Now, from that same meeting, he baptized this man, Billy, who is still attending. Now, this story is wild. Also, that picture's kind of wild. TV looks like somebody got mad and threw their controller at it in a video game there for a minute. So from this meeting in the shop, there was a 97-year-old man that had gotten to know about Brandon. And he was driving around one day. Have you guys ever been to the middle of nowhere? So where this guy was driving around was 30 minutes past that. And he saw a building that had a for sale sign in it, and it also had a sign that said Church of Christ. And so this 97-year-old preacher that had 4 people at his congregation, who, by his own words, didn't know what he was doing and was killing his congregation, called and said, hey, I see this building's for sale. What are you going to do with it? How much is it? And the lady on the other end of the phone said, what do you want with it? And he said, I want to reopen the Church of Christ in this community. And she said, you can have it. And so he said, uh-oh, I've already got one place and I don't know what I'm doing. Now I've got this other place. What am I going to do? So he has 2 buildings. So he calls Brandon and says, Brandon, I got a building. You can have it. And so Brandon's like, well, okay, what are we going to do? The older guy wanted to restart services. Just get members from area churches, come on Sunday afternoon and we'll have a worship service. But Brandon's like, that doesn't really change the registry of heaven. What's that going to do? So he just started remodeling the building, and people from the community, mind you, 30 minutes past the middle of nowhere, there's not even a Dollar General. That's how remote this is. People see him working on the building and they start, hey, what are y'all doing in here? Well, This sounds made up. This is their first night. In this picture, 4 people are Christians. Brandon, his wife, a guy that helped him, and that guy's daughter. And then a couple of these kids are his, but the rest of these people, just people from the community. 30 people showed up. Now from that study, one thing they did not anticipate is neighborhood kids were going to come. This is one of the best classrooms in the Brotherhood, and it's plywood. You think these kids cared? Not at all, because this lady, Brandon's mom, who showed up to start teaching them using apologetics press material, loved them and told them about Jesus. And you could not keep them away. Now from that, I need to update this because that study has grown. It can't handle all this goodness in the pictures, I think. That study has grown from 30, listen, every Thursday night, 30 minutes past the middle of nowhere right now, 80 people are going. Now from that study, what Brandon has done is he just slowly teaches the Bible. And when somebody in the back pops their head up, they get it, he sees it, off to the side. Hey, I saw you notice that. Would you like to study more about that? Sure would. Boom. Baptism. Baptism. Now, this is Brandon the night before the gospel meeting community Bible study in his shop. And he's studying, and people think this is what evangelism looks like. And it is. Again, if you don't know the word, what do you have to share? But this is also what evangelism looks like. You got World Bible School study Bibles here. You got AP study Bibles here. You have Back to the Bible study materials here. You have an illustration of what baptism reenacts. And then you have them, and this is probably around midnight, close to 1 in the morning, getting the food ready for the next day. Now, who made Brandon do that? Do you know who paid for that meat? Do you know which Brotherhood work paid for it? None. Do you know which church pulled it out of the budget? None. He took it out of his budget, and he did it. You know who made him do it? Nobody. But in the Bible, that's normal because we're missionaries. Number 3, we need knowledge. Now, the thing about this is, though, it's specific knowledge. You don't need to know, maybe, everything that you think you need to know. Now, why could someone be a Christian for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and never convert somebody? But somebody who's been a Christian for a week can teach their best friend. Because what we need to know is a very specific set of things, and it may not be as much as we think. Now, in order to teach the Bible, you need to know it. But if you set a goal of reading all 66 books, that might crush you. Like if you walk out of here saying, man, I got to know the Bible before I teach anybody anything, and there's 66 books and I haven't read them all, that, you know what you're probably going to do with that feeling? Say, never mind. Right? Probably, honestly. But you cannot believe the whole Bible if you haven't read the whole Bible. That needs to be a goal of yours. I might get in trouble, but I wonder what would happen if I went to every congregation in the country and asked every elder, have you read the whole Bible? I might not make it, I might get killed, but if that's true, is that a shame? It is a shame. And it'd be a shame for you if you get old enough and you haven't read the whole thing either. Now, I know you can't do that tomorrow, but set that as a goal down the road. I'm going to read the whole thing. But here's a good place to start. Not all 66 right now, but start here. A friend of mine put this on social media, Stephen Yeager. He went to Bear Valley, and I thought this was really good. It's kind of genius. But if you'll just read these books, maybe take a picture of this or write these down. If you'll read just these books, you'll have a good general overview of what's going on in the Bible. And you can go back and add everything else after that. You just set as a goal, can you read all 66 in the next 3 months? Probably not. You'll probably get to Leviticus and quit. But don't do that. But can you read these in the next 6 months? I bet you can. If you can watch as much Netflix as some of us watch, I bet you can knock this out in a month or so. But let me give you a just brief summary of the Bible. You can't do this today. You're going to forget a lot of what I say, and that's okay. But you need to set as a goal to be able to have kind of a big picture view of what's going on. So let me give you a big picture view of what's going on. And then I'm going to share a sermon that it's got a QR code. You can listen to this. And if I were you, I'd listen every day. But here's a big picture overview of the Bible. We usually divide the Bible Old Testament and New Testament. There's nothing wrong with that, but it can be confusing because in the Old Testament, you actually have 2 time periods. You have the patriarchs and the law of Moses. So you think of the Old Testament as one book, it's confusing. And in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in a way, are kind of actually in the Old Testament because Jesus hasn't died yet. So another way that we can divide the Bible is the world before sin and the world after sin. Because Genesis 1 and 2 is the world that God created, a perfect world. And man messed it up in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6. So Genesis 1 and 2, the world before sin, Genesis 3, 6, and after, the world after sin. But in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6, Adam and Eve sinned. Verse 8 says that they were hidden from the presence of God. And verse 15 promises a solution is going to come through the seed of woman. So Genesis 3, 6, sin. Genesis 3, 8, separation. Genesis 3, 15, a solution, a Savior is coming. We think of the gospel as a New Testament term. And it is. But it's not just a New Testament term. The gospel is preached from beginning to end. Genesis 3, sin, separation, and Savior. And Genesis 3 through 12 is really the background of redemption, getting us looking ready and looking forward to a solution that's going to come. You get to Genesis chapter 12 through 50, it's all about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. It's really not about those guys. Every time a promise is made to them, the seed of woman, the seed of Abraham, a solution is coming through you. You know what happens every time one of those guys has a promise made to them? They mess up. And you know what that says? Oh, cool, I don't have to be perfect to be a part of this. That's one thing. The second thing is this. Those men are part of the solution, but they are not the solution. None of them. They're all looking forward to it. So the world before and after sin, background of salvation, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. You get to Exodus. Exodus 1 through 12 is about slavery in and judgment on Egypt. And so Moses, marches back into Egypt and he says, let my people go. And they go through all the miracles. And eventually Pharaoh lets them go and they march towards the promised land. Now this is really important. Exodus 13 through 18 is about a 2-month road trip to get them to Mount Sinai. And Exodus 19 all the way through Numbers 10 is 1 year at Mount Sinai. Like if you have a Bible, flip to Exodus 19 and then flip to Numbers 10 and just hold that in your hand for a second. And I'll wait and give you guys a second to get there. Exodus 19 through Numbers 10. And just hold that in your hand. How thick is that in your Bible for those of you that are there? All right, that's 1 year. 1 year at Mount Sinai. Now, why did God park them at Mount Sinai? They're about to go in the promised land, teach them to be warriors. No, God says, I'll fight your battles for you. Well, they don't know how to farm. They're nomads. They need to learn how to farm and raise. No, God says, I'll give you food. Well, they need to learn how to maybe put together clothes because they don't have. No, God says your clothes won't wear out. Well, what if we get sick? God says you won't if you follow my laws. That 1 year at Sinai is all about getting ready to be God's people and to learn what it means to be in covenant with God. That section in your hands there that you're holding is 1 year at Mount Sinai, and God gives them the law. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this, but I do want you to pull out your phone for a second. And usually people say, hey, what are you doing? Put your phone away. I'm saying, hey, get your phone out. Pull this up, pull up your camera app, and just, you know how to do a QR code. But what I'd like you to do is at some point in the next few days, listen to this sermon. This is a one sermon summary of the entire Bible. And what I would recommend to you, if you want to have a big picture view of things, I would listen to this sermon seriously every day for a while. How long? I don't know. I listen to it all the time. Because what I want, the kind of knowledge I want, not lost in the weeds, maybe not even book, chapter, and verse, but I just want a big picture overview of the Bible. If that's important to you, I would pull this sermon up and I would listen to it several times until you can do an outline of the Bible from memory. And you listen to that sermon and you'll be able to. Knowing your faith and knowing how to share it are two different things. Like, if you learn to share your faith, the knowledge that you need, you're only going to get a few questions. The questions that you get all the time will be the same. And so you need some specific knowledge. How do I become a Christian? What's a big picture overview of the Bible? And what's my story? The New Testament is full of people who are telling their stories. All right, let me skip ahead a little bit because of time. Number 4, you need a plan. There's a football coach, Vince Lombardi, and he said, you see the guy on top of the mountain? He didn't fall there. The guy that's on the top of the mountain had a plan and he got there. Benjamin Franklin once said that if we fail to plan, then we plan to fail. We need a plan. I have a friend who has a very slow approach with people. He spends tons of time with them over a couple year period before they're converted. I have another friend who tries to, as quick as he can, befriend people and have them in his home and earn a Bible study. And then when he gets there, he tries to say, hey, have you enjoyed the church? Do you want to know more about it? And get in a 3-part Bible study. And they have both converted hundreds. Which plan is the best? Well, whichever one it is that you'll do. Whichever one that it is that would work for you. But what we've done where I'm at to be successful is we've kind of combined both of these. We have a come and see approach, and then we also set aside some time for Bible study. Here's one thing that I want you to do in this come and see approach. Include Jesus in your conversations. Today is Saturday. Tomorrow at church, somebody's going to ask you how your weekend was. You go to church with anybody that's not here right now? Anybody? If one of them asks you, don't make them feel bad. I'm not talking about beating them up. But if they ask you how it went, dude, you missed out. Other than the last speaker of the day for teens, everybody else was pretty good. Find something that you like about this and tell them about it. Give them 30 seconds. At Monday, adults, on Monday at work, or when you go back to school, kids, somebody's going to say, how was your weekend? Use that as an opportunity for Jesus. I'm not saying preach a 30-minute sermon to them, but say, man, it was great. We hosted this thing at my church, and all these people came. Somebody cooked food. 30 seconds. You know what most people are going to do when you give them that? Okay, all right, cool, thanks, see you later. But every once in a while, somebody's going to latch on to that. And really, if you do that every day, here's what's going to happen in a few weeks. Somebody, and usually who you least expect, is going to come back to you and say, hey, you know what, you talked about church the other day. Yeah. I had a question about that. I've actually started reading my Bible a little bit. And for some of those people, you're going to say, you? Really? Okay. But when someone says, how was your weekend, what they just invited you to do is tell them about how great Jesus is. Take those opportunities and have a come and see approach. And we need to do that even with each other. What a waste, what a shame, if the only people in the world who can actually help us, all we talk about is sports, or business, or politics, or the weather. Who cares? And I like some of those things as well. But I can find groups online, or I can go to a place and do something. The only people in the world who are going to help me be smarter and more like Jesus and get to heaven are the people that are here. And if I show up and all I talk about is sports, I have missed the point of even being together. So don't just do that with the world, but how was your weekend? Make it spiritual, even for brothers and sisters. Talk about spiritual things. This is a big one too. One thing you can do in this come and see approach, and you're having a plan, is to build a community. Get a partner. What I would do if I were you, if you want to be serious about this when you leave, is start a group text or find a buddy. Anybody ever been to like a pool and they put you on the buddy system? Like if your buddy's in the pool, you get in the pool. That way nobody drowns. And when your buddy gets out, you got to jump out of the pool as well. We need this evangelistically. You just try to go be some great evangelist on your own. You know how many people can do that? It's like 1 in a million. When Jesus sent them out in the limited commission, he sent them 2 by 2. You need to go out 2 by 2 as well. I have 3 or 4 group texts. And they're just about what I'm doing in my community and what they're doing in their community. And we text all the time. And here's the reason for that. That stuff rubs off on you. And you're the only one in the group text that's not talking about a Bible study. It shames you in a good way. It's just encouraging. Get a partner. If you really want to build a community, if you really want to change things, you get a partner and you start texting with them and talking with them. The church was designed to be in each other's lives, not just in the same auditorium a couple times a week. You want to make church miserable? Say, see you next Sunday. And then expect your kids to want to be a part of something like that. What even is that? But the church is designed to be together. I'll share a few things that we've done. Again, this is outdated. I should fill it up. But when my coworker Rod was converted 5 years ago, we started a men's group. And he thought we already had one going, but little did he know I started it for him because this new Christian was coming to our town, and his college minister called me and said, hey, you need to disciple this guy and mentor him. And I said, yeah, I totally know how to do that. But just in case I have absolutely no idea what any of that means, what do you suggest? And that started me on this wonderful journey. And so I started this group with Rod. We met every Tuesday night in my basement. But you know it's really awkward to meet with a new convert, just you and him in your basement? Who wants to come do that? So I had to look around the congregation and say, who else could use something like this? And so me and Rod and Weldon, who's here, who led singing earlier today, and some other guys, we got together. This is a brief summary, about 1/4 of what's happened from the men's group that started because Rod was converted. You know a lot of people who may already go to church somewhere, and if you say come to church on Sunday, they may say, I can't, I already have a place. But you build a community that you can invite them to outside of Sunday and outside of this building, and people will come to that. Man, especially men, you've got such a great opportunity. Men are craving close friendship with other men. A lot of men are stuck in pornography, and they don't know how to get out of it, but you form a group like this, and you create something where you can actually talk with people and invite people to something between the Sundays, and you can build something pretty cool. I'll mention this and move on, but 7 of our guys from the men's group have baptized their first person since we started this. That's as important to me as anything else that we've done. Our college group has grown from 4 or 5 in the past couple of years to 45. I want to talk about this, and I'll end here. I'm actually out of time, but let's end here. This is my friend Blake. Blake is here today. I actually had to submit this Wednesday and didn't know Blake was coming, or Weldon, until after this, so I didn't know they were going to be here. But it does make it better that they're here. So we started a college group a couple years ago with 4 or 5 students, and all you need is 4 or 5, and you can say, hey, we have a college group. And then you meet somebody out in public and you tell them about it, and they come, and now, well, maybe they were expecting a bigger group, but now we've got 6. And as long as you make the lessons good and you care about them, they'll come. But I was speaking at PTP last year, and I spoke every day except Sunday. And back home, we had a college fair at one of the local colleges where they allowed us to come set up a booth for the congregation. And that was the one day that they let us do it, and the one day I wasn't speaking. And to be honest, I wasn't real thrilled about driving home 4 hours to set up this booth. I was wishing some of our current students would have set it up and they would have done it themselves. But Rod and I, we left PTP, we left at like midnight, we drive home, we get home really late, get up, teach Bible class the next morning, and then we go out to set up this booth. Now keep in mind, Rod and I have driven 4 hours one way to come do this, and none of our students showed up to help. Rod and I set up everything, we're sweating, we're tired, we didn't get in till late, and then slowly, praise the Lord, one by one our students started to show up. They were just running late. So I've been in a bad mood, but that really helped me out. And while we were there, we talked to a lot of people. We made what I would call 10 good contacts. One of those was Blake. And we hit it off really well. We got his number. We got several people's numbers. We were really excited. And then honestly, at first, Blake kind of stopped contacting us. But we had added him to the group meet. And a couple of months later, he called me in the middle of the night. It was like 10 o'clock, something like that, and said, hey, I've been looking at the videos you guys post in the group meet. I've been keeping up with everything. I've been studying on my own, and I want to be baptized. And so Rod and I drove up to the building. We studied for about 45 minutes, and Rod baptized Blake. And the cool thing is, when we baptize somebody, we put out the bat signal, and even if it's late, people will usually come to that. And since that time, Blake has really grown. This is him reading scripture after he was baptized, working on a service project at the church. Lauren, we studied with Lauren, and she was baptized. Blake was able to come to that, and Blake preached his first sermon a couple of weeks ago. Now, what's amazing about that is we were listening, me and Rod were at the office listening to a David Shannon lesson. Rod was convicted and decided to do something about it. So Rod, some of our students, and Blake went downtown and just asked people, do you know where the Oak Hill Church of Christ is? Do you know what 25 of the 26 people said? Yes. They said, no idea. One person knew. All right? But in that, they made 6 good contacts who said, I'm going to come visit. All 6 did not come, but 2 did. 2 came. Austin and his girlfriend, Caitlin. They came not only Sunday morning to my Bible class, but to worship. They came Monday night to the college Devo. Tuesday night, he came to the men's group. Wednesday night, he came to Bible study where we had question and answer, and we answered their questions. And that earned him a study with Rod, and Rod studied with him and baptized him about a week ago. Now, you might remember from this picture, but Austin wasn't by himself. His girlfriend was there. And so Austin's girlfriend, Caitlin, started coming to our women's study that's every Friday night. You want to grow the church? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. That's how often we get together every single week. Nobody makes it to all of it, but we make it as much as we can. I don't think you can grow the church Sunday to Sunday. Last night, Caitlin studied with, she was passed off to one of our girls in the group, and she studied, and this PowerPoint's already out of date because Caitlin was baptized last night. And do you know who baptized her? Do you want to guess? Austin, her boyfriend, did. A Christian one week, baptizing somebody the next week. Studied with them separately to make sure it wasn't an emotional thing. But that's how it works. You build a community. Build a community. All right, we're going to go through these quickly. These are some different stories and some different pictures that would have been amazing if I hadn't have gotten long-winded. One thing I want you to know about all the pictures I just went through, that's the past 2 years. This isn't the greatest hits of my life or of our congregation, but this just shows you what's possible. That's a terrible picture. That's your sister. All right, one more QR code I want you to scan. We put together at House to House, we put together a list of about 30 sermons by soul winners. These are guys who together have baptized thousands. Neil has a sermon on there. I think Hiram has a couple. I have a couple. But what I want to encourage you to do is to pull these up and listen to them at some time if you're serious about evangelism, because these guys will have an idea that will be able to help you. And this is my last thing. We need mentors. You want to be good at something, you've got to know somebody else who's good at it. If you want to be broke, hang out with broke people. If you want to be rich, hang out with rich people. You want to be an average member, hang out with average members. You want to be a soul winner, find some and hang out with them. I would ask all of these people that are here this week, who's the best soul winner you know? And if there's a name that keeps popping up, I would get in touch with that person, email them, and talk to them and see what you can learn from them. I'm going to leave that there. If you have any interest in knowing a soul winner and you don't know one, now you probably know Neil and Hiram and they're legit. I would get to know them. But if you want to be paired up with somebody, if you're somebody who says, man, I could really use a mentor, I wish there was somebody that could talk to me, that could put me in a group text. If you will email me or call me or message me, I will find you a soul winner that's your age somewhere in this country that you can talk to that is for real about it. Not because they're on staff somewhere, but because they're just a Christian. Thank you guys. Oh, I'm going to end this in prayer. Let's pray. Dear God, we love you. You're good to us. Please help us to reflect that by being good to you. Please help us to spread your message with every fiber of our being and not be content until we've done that. Thank you for the people in this room, and I pray we provoke each other to love and good works. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.